Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher. It is about us, the authors.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. My name is Gorman John Ruggiero, and I'm the author of a book called 30 Plays for Child Actors. And here it is, that handsome volume right here. This book is the culmination of almost 40 years of work with children. I chose 30 of what I consider my favorite plays to present in this first volume. These plays were written over a period of 35 to 40 years, starting in 1982. They are short plays, long plays, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 7 minutes, an hour and a half, an hour and 45-minute musicals. These plays began to be written in the early 80s when I was in Saratoga Springs, New York, working with children. And I couldn't find a play in the libraries because there was no computer, there was no online, there was no internet. So I would go to the public libraries in the various towns in upstate New York, specifically Saratoga Springs, where the company was, and could find nothing. So I decided to write my own play. And I wrote an adaptation of Puss in Boots, which over the years has been rewritten and performed numerous times. And now it is a hour-and-a-half full-length production called The Fighting Catblade. And it's in this volume. You can read it. So if anyone has any questions for me during this program, just don't forget to type them out. You can ask me questions. You can comment. You can critique, you can just make observations. Whatever your information you want to tell me, just let me know. I did have a video to play, and it was a Chinese video, but I'm not sure if it's lost in the mix. So we may just have to wait for that for tomorrow night. But I will continue with this broadcast without the video, it seems. So ask me any questions about my book or my work. Early in 1982, I was walking through the park shortly after I began working with children, teaching them acting. There was a group of children huddled around another boy who had a small device in his hand, about this big. And I was a little surprised because I hadn't seen this kind of activity before, because normally when I'm in the park, walking through the park to get home, children are running around, playing, screaming, the parents are calling them. But this group was huddled up in front of a little electronic device, I found out. And it was absolutely mesmerized. They were all mesmerized. I was kind of surprised because I hadn't seen anything. Hello, Mildred B. Coyle has commented, "Hey, Gorman, nice to see you here. How are you doing tonight?" I'm doing absolutely great. Thank you, Mildred. Appreciate your comment. So these children were mesmerized by this little electronic gadget, and it occurred to me that this was not quite right. I felt very strange, and I thought, oh my goodness, this looks like the future right in front of my face. And here we are 40 years later, almost 41 years later, and we are dealing with a social media issue with children. It's not only social media, it's all screen time. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions as we go through here. Mary H. Johnson commented, how do you choose the plays that you include in your book? Great question. So I always wanted to write plays for children to teach them about world cultures. So I've always looked for the most interesting plays and stories, mythology, fairy tales, folk tales, religious stories, histories from many other cultures, including American culture, but many other cultures. So I wanted to introduce children to world cultures. So I would go through literally thousands of plays. I mean, I remember I read 1,000 folk tales before I could choose an Italian folk tale, which is called Pedrolino and the Pouting Princess, which is a very funny comedy, great for kids to perform and to read. If you're at a party, you want to read these plays, copy the plays, hand out scripts to the team, and let everyone enjoy reading instead of being involved in front of a movie or a video game or the cell phone. Let everyone sit around and read these plays to each other and communicate. So that first experience with those children in the park led me to write a play called Stephen the Pip and the Stolen Star. I'm going to interrupt this myself again. Mary commented, hi, Gorman. I'm curious, what was your process of gathering those plays? Is there any ranking to them? Actually, my process of gathering the plays was I would search for a story that I liked, and based on the group of children I was working with at the time, I would select that story and I would write the play with those children in mind, with those characters in mind, with those particular characteristics of the children, their personalities, and I would incorporate all that into the script itself. The plays don't have any rankings except for the amount of time they run. They run from 2 minutes to 1 hour and 45 minutes. Some are musicals, most are not. And like I said, they include history, mythology, folk tales, fairy tales, religious tales from many different cultures. So I was working with the children, and when I began to work with them, I realized they didn't have the communication skills necessary to begin an acting craft. So if you are trying to teach a child the piano, they need to learn the notes of the scale before they can play a song. And what do? They learn the notes. And in acting, it's the same way. You have to learn the notes of the craft. You have to learn the fundamental, basic processes of communication. And there's 3 areas in which people communicate: physically, emotionally, and intellectually. Physical means gesture, movement, dance, facial expressions. Emotional means any kind of emotional content that comes with it. And intellectual means not only what you think, but what you express verbally. I divided those 3 areas of communication into smaller parts, broke them down to the most fundamental areas you could get, and then I would teach those children those fundamentals. Joanne P. Barber commented, what is your advice for people who want to try acting but is dealing with low self-confidence? Okay, that's a very good question, very common. Most people experience bouts of low self-confidence throughout their whole lives. Even the most confident people experience that. My advice for people is to remember, if you go into an acting class, make sure you go into a class where you're not forced to perform right off the bat. The way I work with children is I tell parents before they sign them up when they talk about this issue. I say, your child can come to my class, but they don't have to perform. They can just sit there and watch. Watching other children perform and play theater games and improvisational games is very, very exciting, very interesting. And after 1 class or 2 classes or maybe 8 classes, those shy, reticent children want to join in on their own by themselves without anybody prompting them. What I do throughout that process is I ask them questions. What do you see these other children are doing? What do you think? What do you like? So if you're nervous about getting into an acting class, remember the people who are in that class are just as nervous as you. And I recently had a conversation with someone telling them this very fact. Remember, when you get in front of an audience, you are in front of a group of people who came to see you, most of whom are very nice, kind people who will give you the benefit of the doubt. They're not there to judge you or critique you. There may be a couple here and there, but don't forget you're in front of a bunch of human beings who are playful enough to go to a theater and want to be entertained. And they're usually nice folks. So that's my advice. So in teaching my children communication skills, I would work with them for most of the first 6 weeks just on physical expression. We'd incorporate dance, yoga, martial arts, a variety of different physical disciplines go into the work. And then when out of that work, emotional content just springs automatically, because through the physical gesture and movements that they do in the improvisational exercises, they're sometimes emoting. And then I would pinpoint that emotion. I said, well, let's stop and talk about what are you feeling right now? What is that emotion? Explain it to me. And I'd let them explain it. As we go along in the process, children become very adept at not only self-analyzing their emotional content, but also in how they present it to other people. I have another comment from Christine Gines. When it comes to enhancing communication skills, is it effective practicing in front of the mirror? I had this question last night. Yes, it is. It's very, very good to practice in front of a mirror, because when I was a child, I would make faces in front of the mirror for very long periods of time. And my parents and my aunts and uncles would always yell at me to get away from that mirror. That's too weird. It's too strange. But I was having a blast. And I always did it for many years. And then when I went to my first conservatory training program, part of the Grotowski work we used was standing in front of a mirror and looking at your face and making expressions. So yes, looking at yourself in the mirror is always a good idea to learn how to use your facial expressions. In your opinion, this is Parker Brook. In your opinion, is it possible to tell whether a child is going to be an actor in a play or not? Yeah, you get a sense of it. You get a sense of whether a child will be a performer in some way, or a great communicator, or a very expressive person. Whether or not they're going to be in a play or not is up to them. But you can sense while you're working with children, there are some children who just have a natural ability to express themselves emotionally, physically, and verbally. Yes, you can tell. You give me a room full of children and give me 2 hours with them, and you don't even need me. You can point out the children yourself. You'll be able to see it. So the fundamental skills of communication have to be learned before you can approach an acting technique. The other thing I recommend for parents is to figure out how many hours a day your children spend in front of a screen. And what I mean is a telephone, a television, a computer screen, a Game Boy, anything that has a digital interface with them. You may be surprised that some of your children are on screen time 40 to 50 hours a week. I know that sounds extreme, but do it by the day. I used to deal with parents, especially parents with children on the autism spectrum. And I would ask, one of the first things I would ask them is, how many times a day is your child in front of a screen? You're saying he doesn't socialize well. So tell me, how many days is he in front of a screen? Because there's a lot of programs today for children with autism that involve working with a screen, and that's not bad. A lot of that can be good, but we need to make sure it's not too much of a good thing. So I would ask the parents, well, okay, let's go through your day. On Monday, how many hours a day in the morning are they in front of a screen? Oh, well, maybe he's on his phone for a half hour. Okay. All right. So a half hour a day. Yeah. Okay. So that's 3.5 hours a week. How about in front of a TV? Maybe a couple hours a day. That's 14 hours a week. How about in school in front of a screen? Okay. In school, they're doing homework for, say, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, 2 hours a day. That's another 14 hours a week. So already you have 28, 29, 30, 31 hours. And then you say, what do they do at night? Well, at night they're playing video games. Okay, that's another 2 hours a night. So now you got another 14 hours a week. So your child is basically working a full-time job. What's the antidote to this? And in 1982, because I saw this coming all through the 80s and 90s, and then it became prevalent in the mid 90s, people are now being diagnosed with social media addiction and digital addiction. The solution is get your children into the performing arts, get them to read plays, sit down at a family gathering when you're having a movie night and introduce a 2-minute play. And before the movie, say, we're going to read this play and we're going to act as if we are actors before we watch the movie. Get kids used to doing that. My youngest son had a verbal issue because he had 4 front teeth pulled at a very young age, and he had trouble speaking. So we used to sit and read plays. And also when he got older, we used to read Shakespeare out loud. That young man turned into a fine adult actor who speaks beautifully. Angela commented, how does the inclusion of plays based on folktales, mythology, and religious stories contribute to the cultural exploration aspect for child actors in this collection? Well, that's a great question, Angela. What they will find out is that these stories from other countries about characters and people and animals have a lot to do with them. They have a lot in common with these stories. Children inadvertently love these tales because some of them are very funny. Even the serious ones are interesting for them, and they understand what's going on in the story because most of these tales are universal. Most folk tales, mythologies, and religious stories have universal themes, and I always point out those themes, and we work those into the character traits that the children portray. And so the universality of these themes there's also a universality of character types. So wherever I go, and I spend a lot of time in China, the human brain works basically the same. The cultural elements change the way the brain works, but for the most part, everyone is a human being and has all the same attributes of every other human being. Mary H. Johnson commented, I love how your book lets children explore the world through theater performances. Yes, acting out is something children do naturally. I mean, I have a 3-year-old granddaughter who will be 3 this week. And when I visit her, she's always cooking something up on her little play stove, or she's always making believe this and bringing me this and dressing up in costumes and everything. So yeah, children love to act out naturally. So they call a play for a reason, because we're playing. Even adult actors, even in a serious drama, they are actually playing and having a great time. Even if it's a tragedy, we are actually playing as actors. So yes, children playing through theater performances, and also dance. Don't forget dance, music, any of the expressive arts is very healthy for children, especially in a world where we are inundated with way too many opportunities for media and digital interfacing. Children need to cut that down, and it's up to parents to make that happen. One of the ways you can do that is to read plays with your children. Marcus Dean commented, can you highlight a play or musical within the collection that particularly emphasizes teamwork or collaboration among child actors? Actually, so there's 2 parts to that, Marcus. One, every production that I produce and every production that I work in with children, the team element is always there. There's always, I don't give people lead actors. I give them more responsibility as actors. Some children get less responsibility as actors, but as we go through our system and many children matriculate through my program, the people who played the most responsible roles in one production will get less responsible roles in the next production. But in the play, there's a play called The Mayor of Chidleyville, and it's about a town where no fun is allowed. And the mayor, mad at us, his name is Mayor Mad at Us, has a Junebug festival every year where the children have to work things. So the girl who's the main character and her friend Pester, her young male friend Pester, they team up with a group of clowns who happen to be wandering through the countryside. And they form a plan to change the law in Chidleyville where no fun is allowed. And they do that by working together as a team. Every one of these plays have some element of teamwork. Gobelarian, which is a fine work for which is a lot of physical activity for children, less words, much more physical activity. It's all teamwork, and they work in groups. Colin Spence, I'm sorry if I pronounce it wrong. Spence, how do you ease a child's nervousness or anxiety minutes before the play? I can imagine some of them are going to be really nervous, but it wouldn't be easy to put them at ease. That's a really great question, Kaylin. I'll say Colin. But I don't wait until a few minutes before the play. I start that work before the first rehearsal. I work with easing children's nervousness or anxiety well before they even read the first play. Before they read the play, we do all kinds of physical and emotional improvisational exercises that get them all warmed up and confident in their ability to express themselves. The ability to express oneself is the most important thing we can teach children for confidence in personal and professional relationships. So when you start at the beginning, by the time my children get to the opening night, they just want to get on stage. Very rarely have I had a child who was nervous. And what do? We all get together. We do a breathing warm-up before each production with the whole team, and that usually goes away and dissipates. And the children know their lines very well because we drill them. So I rarely have to deal with nervous children before a performance. They're actually very excited. I hope that answers your question. So as I go through the process, I urge people to, again, look at the amount of screen time that children are using so you can get a grip on how many hours a week they're spending in front of screens. May R. Lamoureux commented, I can imagine that kids will definitely gush over mythology. Yes, they do. They love it. I know someone's son who is a big fan of Hercules and watches the 1997 film almost every day. Yeah, that's a great story. The story of a man with unusual strength and power to do good for others, and the trickery of his dearest friend is always interesting for children because they understand all that. Greek mythology is very interesting, but we also use, I have plays of many different cultures that are not included in this first volume. So yes, children love that. As we go through the work, I'm going to check my time. Okay, we're in good shape. Remember, if you come back tomorrow night, I'll show the video from China. It's a 6-minute video, very interesting, and I'll explain what that's all about tomorrow evening at 7. So again, I have another comment. Cynthia Lake commented, are there any specific themes or life lessons that the plays in this collection aim to convey to the young actors and their audiences? Yes, very specific themes, very specific and very common universal themes. Basically, how do you treat other people? How do you interact with other people? Many of the themes these children, and they love them, is teamwork. Almost every play has teamwork. There's one play called Elephants and Hummingbirds. It's a Chinese folk tale that I adapted, and it's about a bunch of hummingbirds who come into the jungle and they run into a couple of big, arrogant, bully elephants. And the elephants are thrashing around and saying, you know, we're the biggest, strongest people in the jungle. And the hummingbirds say, well, you're very strong, but you're not that strong. So the hummingbirds lay down on the ground and they stick their feet up in the air. And the elephants say, why are you laying down on the ground with your feet up in the air? And the hummingbirds say, well, the sky is falling down and we all have to do our part. So the elephants say, The sky is falling down, so they have to get down, and they get down and they stick their feet up in the air and they hold up the sky also. So that's a teamwork story. The themes of, I have stories with themes of do not use illegal substances or drugs. How do you deal with bullies? There's plays in there that has how do you deal with bullies. Okay, I have another comment. Lynn D. Flores commented, how do you balance avoiding burning out a child with their role in the play and giving them more responsibilities as an actor or actress to help become better in their field? Great questions. So my plays begin, when I have a starting actor, I work with 4 to 6 year olds and their play is 2 minutes long. So if you have 6 or 8 children in a play, you have a 2-minute play, they have a very short role, which means they can practice for a long time and become excellent. One of the disheartening things I've seen over the years, and I've spoken to this point, is when I see a high school musical that was written for professional singers and dancers at the top of their game being performed by high school students. Now, most of those productions I enjoy very much. They're beautiful. But it's very, very hard work for children who are not, and high school students are children, who are not developed professionally in their craft. So what I do is I give children who need more work, get smaller parts. They start with smaller roles, and as they go through the system, each time they get a larger responsibility until they end up with the biggest responsibility. So they gradually work themselves up. I don't just throw a child in a leading role. Although some parents would like that to happen, I explain that that's never going to happen because I'm looking for children to develop their abilities in a confident way. Clifton commented, did you have difficulty in compiling your plays? Was it easy to do because each story is unique? Well, I have about close to 100 plays. Picking 30 was not that easy because I wanted a variety. I wanted a variety of plays. So I didn't write these all at once. I wrote one play at a time over a period of 40 years. And I produced them as I wrote them. And then after the production, I would throw the scripts in the corner and work on my next production. And then eventually I got to the point, well, you know what? I have a group of children. This play that I already wrote would be perfect for them. So I would go dig that out of the pile and I would rewrite it. And it would become a little longer, maybe a little more involved until my 10 and 15-minute plays ended up being 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, an hour and 45-minute musical. So not difficulty compiling them. It was difficult trying to pick the 30. I spent about a year doing that. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit difficult, but nothing to complain about. Let's say that. Each story is unique. There are some original stories in here. For instance, The Mayor of Chidleyville is an original story that I wrote in honor of George Orwell in 1984. And that has developed over the years. So a very, very beautiful piece of work, if I say so myself. The kids love it. I love it. And it's a great play to read. Mary H. Johnson commented, acting is still some kind of sport. So what are the physical trainings you impart on the kids to improve their acting skills? Great question, Mary. So my training as an actor for the first year was mostly physical work. Jerzy Grotowski had the laboratory theater in Warsaw, Poland in the 60s. He was the next great acting coach of the world after Stanislavski. Konstantin Stanislavski in Russia created the first really organized acting technique. There wasn't any real any program or methodology for acting until Stanislavski. And that was early on in the century. Grotowski came along and began a whole new methodology called the Grotowski technique. And it basically was making the human body as the physical instrument of the actor. Now, there was another Russian artist named Meyerhold who did actually use actors just as physical props. He never let them really act. He just used them as physical circus, clowns and stuff, but never let them perform as a human being. And Grotowski took that one step further. So my advice for young actors is you should be taking dance. You should be taking some form of martial arts. You should be involved in a sport, even if you're not good at a sport. You don't have to be good at a sport to be involved in the sport. Any physical activity that you can do will help your self-awareness and your physicalization in acting. I had one child come into my program. He was on the autism spectrum, and he was about 9 years old when he came into the program, and he had a lot of physical issues with his musculature and a lot of stress and tension. And anyone who has children with autism can attest to the fact that, yes, many children end up with a lot of physical debilitation because of flexibility debilitation because of their stress and other issues with autism. But over the years, after a couple of years, he started loosening up very well, and to the point where you wouldn't even know he was the same child. That child now is producing his own shows. He has his own production company, and he produces shows year after year after year. He started producing his own show when he was 12 years old, directing and producing scripts. So, okay, so we are now at the end of this session. So thanks, Mary, for that question. I hope that answered it, because yes, acting requires a lot of physical stamina. As one of the greatest actors said, acting is stamina. I'll be here tomorrow night at 7. I have a video to show you. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate all the comments and questions. Have a great night. Thanks.